but more than anything, more than any of the diseases, people are more worried about starving to death than they are with COVID or, any of the other diseases that they're dealing with. So the humanitarian crisis is beyond anything we've ever seen in the last 100 years.
What do you know of the ongoing war and humanitarian crisis in the country of Yemen? Thousands of children are dying of malnutrition and starvation due to a US-backed Saudi fuel blockade limiting resources in the country. A few weeks ago, I discussed this humanitarian crisis with Iman Saleh of the Yemeni Liberation Movement. Iman went on a 23-day hunger strike, demanding that the Biden administration end the US support to the Saudi blockade. You may know about this humanitarian crisis in Yemen, or this may be the first time that you're hearing about this. I believe that we come to a deeper understanding of the world and people in it when we choose to respectfully listen and dialogue. So I'm stepping up and inviting you to listen, to understand.
So my name is Iman Saleh. I'm a Yemeni American based out of Michigan, and I'm with the Yemeni Liberation Movement. I'm the general coordinator of the Yemeni Liberation Movement.
There's been a war going on in Yemen, at least internationally recognized since 2014. Can you speak to a little bit to why this war started and who is involved?
Yeah, so we say that the war started in 2015. That's when foreign intervention happened, and sort of like the genocide started. Was in 2015 by the hands of by the United States and Saudi UAE coalition. When the war started in 2015, it was a response to some of the civil issues that were happening in Yemen that the people there were working to resolve. And when the Saudi UAE coalition intervened, that's when things really turned for the worse for the people in Yemen as they were trying to resolve some of the situations that they had. And currently right now, there is a blockade in Yemen, specifically a fuel blockade that started back in December 2020. There's always been a land, air, and sea blockade in Yemen, but specifically this fuel blockade is really, really cruel because of the mass man-made famine that's happening in Yemen. And so when people think of famine, you wouldn't normally think that fuel would be something that could cause it. But when you don't have fuel, you can't transport any of the food or any of the goods or power homes or hospitals without fuel. So what we're seeing is a lack of resources, lack of food, and any food that is able to be transported into the country is at extremely high prices. So no one is able to afford any of these goods. So what we've seen is a lot of children, mostly, and other people in Yemen who have been entering into hospitals for critical malnutrition care. But a lot of these hospitals, over 51% of them, can't operate because they don't have fuel to run their generators. So it's a really sick situation that's happening in Yemen. I like to call this like war crimes gymnastics, where the United States and the Saudi UAE coalition, the United States isn't claiming this blockade. I'll get into that later, but the Saudi UAE coalition can just say that, oh, we're not blocking food and water, other necessities, we're just blocking fuel. But this just has a really cruel ripple effect happening. So when I was in DC, we were hunger striking to demand an end to the U.S. supported Saudi blockade. And one of the biggest walls that we were running into while we were in DC is that the United States government is actually just totally denying that they are even supporting or even don't even know what blockade that we're talking about. So they're just completely denying it, completely lying about it. I think it was the day before I left was when the U.S. envoy to Yemen, Timothy Lunder King, who's a diplomat, finally said the word blockade. But we still have so much, such a long way to go. So just admitting that there's a blockade doesn't actually end it. We need to really push the United States government to actually end the whole blockade.
I mean, we're seeing, I think, two sides. We're seeing the minority Houthi, they're Shia Muslims, if that's correct, right? Backed by Iran. And then we're seeing the internationally recognized Yemeni government, which is
Hmm.
backed by Saudi Arabia, and I guess for some reason backed by the United States as well. Do you know
Hmm.
why that has happened?
So I'm glad you brought all those things up because it's another front in this fight, this anti-war fight. So the United States has always seen the Saudi and the other Gulf countries as allies. We like to call them their clients. They are their clients, and so in order to maintain this relationship, uh, they provide Saudi Arabia and the UAE and and all the other countries that's within the coalition weapons, military support, logistics support, intelligence support, and all those things to sort of maintain this relationship that they have with the Saudi government. So this has been going on for decades. Like the United States and the Saudi relationship has been ongoing and very supportive of each other within the Arab region. Um, so in terms of like this two sides of this war, I wouldn't really call it two sides. There's really so the Houthis are this ancient tribe in Yemen. They're not the typical Shia, the Shias that we sort of understand Shia Islam to be. They're an ancient form of Shia. They're nothing like the Shias in Iran. Um, but what we do know is that they have been they're ancient tribes in Yemen who have been working towards finding a resolve within the Yemen government before this war even started, and they were close. They were almost there to create a sort of a constitution in Yemen and create like a government in Yemen, and that's when Saudi UAE foreign intervention started in 2015. And so, the United States profits a lot from this war. Over, I think so far it's been well over $200 billion in weapons support um, in the war to Yemen. So yeah, so a lot of people bring up this whole two sides to this war and the Houthis and in terms of this proxy war, but it's you read a lot about that because the Saudi government only allows certain journalists to enter into the country to write about it, and that's because it's only the ones that can push their agenda. And so you're going to be seeing a lot of propaganda almost from these news outlets. And the latest one that we can vouch for is a CNN report by Naam al-Bagher, who had to sneak into the country in order to be able to report on what was going on in Yemen. So yeah, only journalists with visas that have been approved by the Saudi government can get in and write about what's happening in Yemen. And the ones that do come in are only writing about the agenda that suits the Saudi UAE coalition.
Talk to me a little bit about the humanitarian crisis that's going on. I know you touched on it a little bit already, but are you hearing anything on the grounds? I've read that several UN agencies are projecting that almost 400,000 children, or children 5 years and younger, are going to be malnourished, potentially die of starvation by the end of the year.
When the UN announced that like there was over 400,000 children that could die from starvation and malnutrition due to the blockade, they said that that was within the coming weeks or months that the blockade started, and those weeks and months have already passed. So we believe we don't have the statistics yet, but we believe many of those children have actually already died. For the most part, a lot of people have been dying from communicable diseases like cholera, dengue fever. And then there's COVID, which we believe exceeds the numbers that we've seen in India and other places. But because there's a lack of testing, there's really no way to fully understand how bad COVID is running into the country. And but more than anything, more than any of the diseases, people are more worried about starving to death than they are with COVID or any of the other diseases that they're dealing with. So the humanitarian crisis is beyond anything we've ever seen in the last 100 years. You're seeing a lot of children under the age of 5 who are dealing with not only malnutrition but chronic malnutrition. So even if some of them are able to heal from whatever humanitarian aid is able to come through, they are repeat patients because they're still continuously dealing with the famine. I mean, and then you're talking about, you know, like the healthcare system that the war has the healthcare system in Yemen was already set back than other countries, but due to the war, it set it back, I think, even like more than 30 years within all of Yemen.
You got to DC March 27, and
Yeah.
you started the hunger strike. And so the hunger strike was with your sister and a few friends, part of the Yemeni Liberation Movement. While you were in DC, you were demanding that President Biden stop all US support to the Saudi blockade. What is the significance, first of all, of going on the hunger strike? And then also, what do you believe you all accomplished during your time in DC?
I mean, hunger strikes have a lot of political relevance throughout history. They've been used. They've been used for thousands of years, but recently we've seen them used in prisons, and we've received a lot of information and inspiration for our hunger strike from specifically Palestinian prisoners. We view hunger strikes as something that is a very, very violent means to an end. It's meant to be your body used as your last conviction, right? You know, you when you're so backed up into a corner, you really don't know what else to do. You said everything that you have to say. So at this point, you are laying your body down on the line to bring awareness or bring change in the environment or situation that you're in. And so when we decided to do the hunger strike, we felt that not only was it the most appropriate action to show solidarity for the people of Yemen who were starving, but it was also the most radical one that we could take to sort of shock America specifically, and also what we didn't realize was we brought a lot of attention internationally with this issue. So it was something that we decided as a collective, as Yemeni Liberation Movement. It was something that we planned for and worked and organized towards doing before we actually set out to do it. We didn't just like sort of jump into a car and head over to DC. We did a lot of planning and researching on what political relevance that hunger strikes had, and was it politically appropriate for this action. And we just sort of went for it. It started off with me, and then it was a rolling hunger strike. We had friends that joined in from the Yemeni Movement, and then it just ended with my sister and I.
What was that experience like for you biologically?
You would be surprised at how resilient the human body is. When we started, the first few days was the hardest. It was really, it wasn't painful, but it was emotionally soul crushing. That it felt like it felt frustrated. Like, how your mind gets frustrated, but it felt like my entire body was really frustrated. And it's really kind of hard to explain unless you're going through it yourself. But it was there was a lot of spiritual connections too that I didn't realize that I would have, which I think maybe that might be something that comes along when you're Muslim and you're fasting every year. But during the hunger strike, it was a very humbling moment, humbling 3 weeks, where it constantly reminded me every single day, every single second, about why I was doing what I was doing, and the impact that we were having with the world. I wouldn't say made it worth it, because really nothing about doing a hunger strike is like an accomplishment. It's more of like something that we need to do. But it was the impact that we had. We couldn't have imagined that we were ever gonna accomplish those things. It's still like, this hunger strike is still something that I'm processing, and we're still kind of just deconstructing each day, and what it felt like to go through this, because most people in America don't stop eating for 23 days. And so it was really important for us to record and have these daily diaries of what each day felt like. But it was a slow decline. And a lot of people probably wouldn't have thought that your mental health would take a toll when you're not eating, but it really did have a huge impact on how I was feeling each day. But yeah, I mean, it's, I wouldn't recommend hunger strikes to achieve what you want, unless it is absolutely the last resort that you have to bring about awareness.
And what were some of the things that you accomplished while you were in DC?
When we first came to DC, we didn't really have, we were being as loud as we can. We didn't really have any of the attention or the impact, at least for the first week. We kept pushing, we kept reaching out, we kept talking and protesting. And by the second week, we started receiving congressional support. So people like Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Cori Bush, Bernie Sanders' office, and a few others expressed their support, shared our information, and things really took off from there, which we kind of expected. It's sad to say, but things don't really get trendy unless, like, some of these trendy lawmakers are about it. But when they supported us in person, we started seeing a lot of news coverage. We started getting a lot of interviews, and it continued on throughout the rest of the hunger strike. People like Mark Ruffalo share our posts on Twitter, and so yeah, the impact was pretty big. I think one of the best things that I heard over the duration of the hunger strike was when Yemenis in Yemen started creating clubhouse fan rooms of my sister and I, where they would just talk about how amazing we were and how incredible it was that two women were going at the White House. And that was probably the best part, not because it like inflated us with this ego or anything, but it was about like how we didn't really expect to see a lot of praise from Yemeni men, because they have for so long have dominated like the political spectrum in Yemen, rather than women. And so we were really, really grateful to see that there had been some appreciation and change about who takes on like this political role of bringing liberation to Yemen.
At the beginning of April, I believe 76 members of Congress sent a letter to President Biden's desk. And I'm just going to read like a short snippet of that letter. They're asking him to use the full weight of U.S. influence and all tools at your disposal to end the blockade so that food, fuel, and medicine and other essential goods can reach millions of people in desperate need. How has the Biden administration really responded since? I'm sure you've been monitoring what's been going on.
Yeah. So when the letter first came out, we felt like at this point that the United States or specifically the Biden administration could no longer ignore this blockade. And we were really, we were sort of shocked when the State Department came out with a statement shortly after the letter was dropped that of them denying the blockade. So, just completely lying through their teeth and just denying that this blockade even exists. They're saying that they're not only saying that this blockade exists, but they're saying that food and other goods are freely entering the country. So just absolute lies. It was like something that it just felt like that they had to have thought people in the American public were stupid, because you can just clearly see the pictures and the videos and the articles that come out of Yemen, and see that there's clearly something that there's clearly a blockade, there's a siege happening in Yemen, and we were at least knowing that the Congress didn't believe this lie. Then a few days after, I believe it was about less than a week after, the House released a similar letter, and it was a nonpartisan issue, them also requesting the United States and the blockade and support for the blockade. And the State Department again came out with just completely denying, you know, this blockade, doubling down. It was by far, it was just so frustrating, and we just felt like at that point that there's definitely something that they're planning, because you can't just wholeheartedly deny this blockade so strongly. And so we were waiting at that point for some information out of Lender King or Antony Blinken. And then that's when we saw that there was a House committee hearing, that he had two hearings. Timothy Lender King, the U.S. envoy, had two hearings the following week. That's when the absolute dumbest phrase we've heard from him yet, saying that he doesn't know the U.S.'s influence or role in the blockade. Yeah, we showed up in front of his house and protested, you know, basically demanding that he stop lying and come out with the information and actually end this blockade.
You are part of the Yemeni Liberation Movement. How can people get involved and know more about what you do?
The best way for people to support us is to go on our Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and follow us. Because if you're following us, then you'll be up to date with everything that we're doing and all of our future actions that we're doing. And we also need people to share any of the information that we put out there. There's our posts and our information are really getting suppressed. We've been heavily shadow banned over the last 3 weeks during our hunger strike, and we continue to be shadow banned. And so we really need everyone's support in sharing and spreading our message, just to help get it in front of more eyes and in front of more people who can help us make the change. A lot of our work is rooted in grassroots movements, and so we're all volunteers. We don't get paid for anything that we do. We do this out of like the time that we have. And so any support that people can provide us, even if it's through donations, we have CashApp and Venmo if people want to reach out and donate to us that way. Our CashApp is YLMdetroit for people who want to support us monetarily. And then there's also donations through a charity that we're not affiliated with them, but we have worked with them in the past, and we only recommend this charity. It's called Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. We only support them because not only are they also a completely volunteer-led organization, they also do a lot of anti-war work. And so that's really important when we support charities who are involved in these war zones, to also be involved in doing anti-war work, because we don't need bandages, we need actual structural change.
What is your hope for the children of Yemen?
You know, it's a loaded question, right? Because you know, right now what we're seeing is that the famine has permanent effects on children, like has specifically neurological effects, and it's permanent. So, you know, what we're worried about seeing, and what we do expect to see, is a debilitating or disabled, debilitated generation of children in Yemen who grow up with these mental issues, you know, even as they grow up. So the hope that, you know, what we hope to see is, you know, a healthcare system for them, as well as like therapy services, and just, yeah, it's you really hit me hard on that one too, Jordan, because you know, like a lot of the work that we did during DC kept in mind of the children that we work with, or the children that we want to see prosper. I'm trying not to cry right now because this is a really touchy subject for me. Yeah, we were actually talking about this right before we left DC, about what exactly liberation looks like. and what exactly is liberation. Like when we talk about it, it's in the name that we organize. And it's not a specific pinpoint. It's not a specific moment where people can just like say that this is the moment we're liberated. We believe it's part of the process. It's part of our freedom. Each and every day, like we can find liberation in all moments, throughout our days and lives and years. So for the children of Yemen, I mean, what we hope to see is obviously not only an end to the blockade and an end to the war, but also ways for them to further their education and understand sort of the structural issues that play a huge hand in Yemen society, and how they can work towards changing that. And so I guess like in this generation right now that we see, we hope that like we can instill some sort of political education and find ways of or liberating forms of change for them in a way that they can continue the work for the next generation after them, so that they eventually can see some sort of peace and prosperity and sovereignty within the country that they're living in.
Is it helpful for people to like contact like a congressperson or their representative at all to talk to them about what's going on? Is that another way that people can get involved?
Yeah. I'm glad okay. So when we were doing our hunger strike, we had we pushed a lot of people to sign and send letters to their Congress members. And so we actually have a very easy link to do that. If you want to go on our Instagram or on our Twitter, we have in our bios a link tree. And in that link tree, we have all these options of like how to help. So one of them is like signing the petition. Another one is signing a letter, which is literally just filling out your information and it'll send it to your appropriate representative. And so, yeah, like a lot of people or a lot of Congress people are already on board with what we're doing. They want to, they also want the United States to end support for this blockade. But what we really want to stress to them is that this is a priority. This is an emergency. We really need you to prioritize this issue. So we're still encouraging people to send out letters to their Congress people in order to continue pushing for an end to this blockade.